Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Replenish Earth speaker series, where we explore climate action through innovative and exciting speakers. Today marks the final day of London Climate Action Week, where we drive the national and international climate policy response, prioritizing the green recovery. I'm Tia Kansara, and our final speaker for our week is Eron, and we are going to be talking about how to mobilize high-integrity, nature-based climate solutions for the private market. The private sector has the potential and opportunity to mobilize its power to halt and reverse deforestation, but it's not happening fast enough. The world loses 7 million hectares of tropical forests annually, the equivalent of 40 football fields every minute. And once it's gone, it's gone. Join us as we explore this incredible topic with Eron Bloomgarden, CEO of Emergent Climate. Welcome, Eron.
Thanks so much, Tia. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for joining us as well. I think one of the opportunities to delve into the work that you're doing would be great, just understanding where is it that you're coming from, what's your story, what triggered you, what called you to action?
Yeah, no, as you said, the challenge of deforestation is enormous, and we know that there is no climate solution unless we get a handle on deforestation, and unless we massively and rapidly reduce deforestation. And beyond climate, I mean, we know the climate story, but beyond climate, there's no solution to biodiversity, there's no solution to the extinction crisis, and then all the communities and people, frankly, who rely on the forest for food and livelihoods. So it's absolutely crucial that we find ways to reverse deforestation at scale, unprecedented scale and unprecedented speed, and that's what we've created Emergent to do. And the idea behind Emergent is recognition that we're not going to be able to do it with just the public sector alone, or just philanthropy alone, or private sector alone. We need ways and mechanisms and strategies to mobilize all of those, public, private, philanthropic, moving in the same direction to massively reduce deforestation. So that's where we're coming from, and that's what Emergent is all about.
Absolutely. So what was it that really triggered this work? Because I think when we talk about the scale at which these solutions need to come in, I remember, the participation from Emergent at the Trillion Trees Coalition, the summit that we put together at the beginning of October, really was delving into some of the innovations in the environment. What kind of tree planting organizations are there? What are the challenges that they're experiencing? And the coalition that we put together was really, in addition, right, to the work that is already being done. It's so nice to do it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you asked where this is sort of came from. What was the? I mean, I think there's personal and professional reasons here. The concept was for Emergent was developed about 4 or 5 years ago. That was the seed, and it's and my children right now are 5 and 7. And when you have children, you start really thinking about what the future holds. And we're at roughly 1 degree of warming since the Industrial Revolution. Our current Paris Agreement, current UNFCCC conversations are talking about 1.5, likely 2 degrees of warming. So we're already seeing enormous impacts at 1 degree. I worry about what 2 degrees looks like. And if we're in a business as usual scenario, right? Just that if we're not successful in the Paris Agreement and the policy measures that have been proposed, we're likely going to blow right past 4 degrees within our children's lifetime, and that's not a joke. I mean, this is an uninhabitable planet, and so that's the personal kind of motivation. And then when we looked at it from an analytical perspective, we designed Emergent jointly with EDF, Environmental Defense Fund. And what we looked at was what are the near-term, cost-effective mitigation opportunities for climate. And there really are three main ones. It's sort of energy in U.S. and energy in China. And then there's deforestation, reversing deforestation. And when I say it's over a gigaton of cost-effective, $20 per ton or less, that is viable within the next 10 to 20 years. And we just, so we focused in on the forest sector, realizing that, there are other economic forces, at play with energy in China and the US. But if you want to keep nature standing, you need to, and protected, our thesis, at least, is you need to change the economic calculation on the ground. And you need to make forests worth more, or at least worth something alive, right? Because the incentive, the temptation on the ground is to, especially in developing countries that, are looking for resources, looking for development opportunities, the temptation is to convert standing forests into some sort of productive economic output. And so if you want to change that incentive, our view is ecosystem services play an important role. And frankly, the ecosystem service that is most sort of liquid and that people are willing to pay for is carbon credits. And so that's what we created Emergent to do, was to do that at very large scale, focus on what we so-called jurisdictional approach. So we will work directly with countries, or in certain cases, subnational governments, and then bring those credits that result from reducing deforestation, and that are verified to very high standards, third-party validated, it's additional, real, etc. And then connecting those to private sector buyers. And really the great, 2020 has been a tough year, but one of the great shining lights has been private sector interest and corporate interest, not only in sort of net zero or climate commitments, but further in using nature as part of their strategies to reach their climate goals. And
can you have some examples of that?
Oh, sure. Microsoft, for example, has announced that not only they're going net zero, but they're going net zero since their founding. Right, they're looking to mitigate all of their climate impacts since they were founded in the 80s. Shell has made big commitments. They've just announced that you're going to be able to offset, for customers in Canada, they're going to be able to offset their purchase at the pump. So you go to fill up your tank at a Shell gas station in Canada, and you can press a button and your tank will be offset with forest protection offsets. On and on. Amazon with the Amazon Climate Pledge, committing to go to net zero by 2040.
Where do you think that goes further? To say that you have sequestered your carbon from the beginning of an organization and the beginning of a product is very different to everybody who has a Microsoft product or service at home that they use, that also continues the responsibility of Microsoft into the hands of the customer. So where do you feel and see the responsibility of Microsoft continuing beyond, the shores of their businesses?
Yeah. So let me first say, this whole idea of offsetting, I think, is very powerful. In my view, the sort of highest and best use of offsetting is to protect nature, right? Precisely because typically nature and ecosystems on their own don't have other revenue streams unless you have some sort of extractive use of it. So now, there's a limit to offsetting. companies should be doing as much as they feasibly can do within their own operations to reduce their climate emissions. So that's first. So they should only be using offsets for those sort of residual emissions where it's just not viable to go net zero in their own operations. This is a nice sort of intuitive example of this is with the airlines. There is not currently, hopefully there will be soon, there's not a zero emissions plane that can be flown. And so if people need to fly, there should be offsetting. Look, at the end of the day, in terms of how a customer and a company share that responsibility, I think it lies on both. People should be responsible about their own emissions, but there are protocols around scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so what we're seeing is typically the kind of use of a product, let's say of a Microsoft product by a consumer, which typically wouldn't have high emissions, but you can imagine, like in the case of Shell, or the use of that product does have high emissions. Those scope 3, we're seeing increasingly that companies are taking responsibility for those sort of scope 3 emissions.
I think one of the challenges for us especially is to understand where does the responsibility begin and or end with each of the different stakeholders. And I think when it comes to climate action, we want to be able to make the right kinds of decisions. If that information is not available, then how do we do that? And then when it comes to companies like you were explaining earlier with the sequestration aspects of it, to sequester what they've done that could be harmful to the environment, do you feel that it is their responsibility to not design products that would have to be sequestered?
Absolutely. That's the first priority. As I was saying, the first priority is to decarbonize a company's own operations. That absolutely has to be the first priority. But it will take time, right? There's no, as I say, there's no, in the aviation, there's not a plane that can be flown that's zero emissions. There's a lot of research that's going into biofuels. There's some research, and I think is it Boeing who's developing a zero emissions plane. But until that product is out in the market, what do airlines do? They should be taking responsibility for their emissions. And fundamentally, I mean, it's an economic principle. In other words, there's an economic externality. If I had one sort of wish, it would be that everybody on the planet understood what an economic externality was. It's kind of a dry concept, but the basic point is, there are a lot of transactions that happen in the world where there's a buyer or seller, and there are impacts that create a cost to a third party that aren't transmitted in that transaction. So pollution is the classic example, where you might be buying electricity, you're paying for the transmission lines, you're paying for the fuel, you're paying for the capital expense of the power plant, but you're not. But in that transaction, you're not paying for the impacts on the environment. You're not paying for the impacts on the health of downstream people who are sitting downstream. So those are economic externalities. And so what we're trying to do with this sort of carbon price is embed that cost in the transaction. So if you're flying, okay, so if you have to pay a few extra dollars to offset your emissions, that embeds the price of the climate impacts of that plane putting emissions into the atmosphere previously for free. And so it's important that price signal, we think, is sort of sent, or at least I think, is sort of embedded in that price. Otherwise, what that leads to is what's essentially market failure. And market failure in this situation is rapid sort of climate change, which will have far-reaching consequences, not just human health, but enormous cost in terms of the impacts that we're going to face from climate change.
Do you feel that a free market sort of contradicts what climate action is about?
So it depends on what you think about a free market. Nobody lives in a free market. I mean, our markets are regulated. We in fact, I've been involved in the launch of the first ever carbon ETF listed on the New York Stock Exchange. That is an incredibly regulated process. I think you can't just show up and say, okay, we're going to launch a new product on the New York Stock Exchange. No, it's incredibly regulated. So the idea of a free market, it depends on where you draw the line. I think we want functioning markets that are truly reflecting the price of a good or a service. So so I think what we're trying to do, part of the idea of a carbon price, offset, and offsets fit into this, is sort of fixing a free market failure.
Understandable. It's like knowing full well what you're getting yourself into, and recognizing that these are some of the costs, some of the social costs, the environmental costs, and accountancy, right? That is required, accounting of these failures to modify the system to adjust to something that is, much more what we call replenishing. Ultimately, sustaining the status quo is getting us only so far. And we're recognizing that deeply embedded in all of our products and services is this question of, is waste necessary? And I think that, in terms of wasting, the infrastructure around wasting, the idea of externalizing our waste, or, that, oh, well, that's kind of external to the system, we don't have responsibility or sight on that. I don't think we're at the luxury at this point in our humanity to be able to externalize that responsibility and hide behind that externality. And I think that, today we really do have this opportunity to create something that is for, the benefit, yes, of transitioning away from fossil fuels. And of course, that takes time, as all of our lifestyles have in some way touched these consequences. But I think also in terms of inviting the systems, the protocols, the governing principles of those global commons. And I think that today, with the opportunity like Emergent has in leading the debate on, sequestration, or recognizing where the private sector can really play a role, is really quite fascinating. Coming back to what Larry Fink was talking about not that long ago, that, if you don't have a planet, basically there is no investment. So it's almost like delinking, right? Like leveraging what we understand about the environment and accounting for it into our, business models effectively. So I really do think that there's a massive opportunity for businesses that want to create entrepreneurial activity around a variety of different business models that have yet to be created.
Yeah, no, agree. And this idea of the transition away from fossil fuels and decarbonize, that's ultimately where we need to get to. We need to completely decarbonize our economy, and in that transition, we think there's an enormous opportunity to protect the world's forests, right? And so that's what Emergent's been set up to do, because as companies are transitioning away from fossil fuels, they should continue to be offsetting. We think, again, back to the offsetting, and replenishing, if you will, nature, right? And so we think there's a huge opportunity to, in that transition, to really massively reverse deforestation. And so that's really what we're focused on.
Totally. Could you maybe share with us some of the vision that you've got for Emergent? Of course, during the times of COVID, it's quite difficult to know what's happening tomorrow, let alone plans for an entire year. But would love for our audience to hear your vision on where you see Emergent, evolving and growing and participating in the conversations that are yet to be had.
Yeah, maybe I'll share a screen. I'm going to share a few slides here, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely. And in the meantime, if our audience has any questions that they'd like to share with Eron, please do share them in the comment section.
So can you see this?
Yes, can see your screen.
Terrific. So I'll just be quick. I mean, I've already made this point that there really is no pathway to Paris goals or a safe climate solution without reversing deforestation. And there's no biodiversity solution without protecting forests. And so we need new solutions, and we need to think at dramatically larger scale. You had asked me also, I've been working on emission reduction projects and in the climate space for almost 20 years. And part of the motivation also, I mentioned my children, part of the motivation also was, it felt really good, as I say, after a day working on an emission reduction project or climate policy, it felt really good going to bed at night, did good work throughout the day, but then waking up and thinking, boy, it doesn't all add up. And this nagging feeling that we're just not doing enough. And so part of the thinking behind Emergent was we need to think bigger, we need to think faster, we need to mobilize more action, we need to increase ambition. And so that's sort of the premise behind Emergent. Here is basically how Emergent works. So I'll walk you through it. We'll walk you through this very simply starting from the top left. So jurisdictions, these are forest countries, right? Think Indonesia or Costa Rica or Brazil or Colombia or Vietnam or etc. If they reduce their deforestation rate, and it's real and it's measurable and it's third-party verified, there's a new standard called the Architecture for REDD+ Transactions, or ART, and the standard itself is called treaties. That standard verifies and ensures that those reductions have actually been made, and it essentially converts them into a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, a tradable carbon credit. Emergent purchases of those credits, provides a long-term sort of guarantee to the supplier countries, and this gives those forest countries both the political will and the certainty that they've got the finance to continue with their forest protection programs. The way that we're able to do that is we raise money from donors. For example, we work very closely with the government of Norway. We've been supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, by Good Energies Foundation, but donors support Emergent, both through Emergent as a nonprofit, both through funding our operations, but also by providing us a buyer of last resort, right? To ensure that we know that there's a buyer available. But we then take those credits and market them to buyers. So those companies that we were talking about earlier, whether airlines or technology companies or transportation companies or et cetera. And then when we receive payment for the credits, we ensure through, as you see on the right side of the graph, we ensure that these payments are properly tracked and monitored through third-party financial intermediaries, right? So that we know that those funds are getting back to the ground to support additional climate and forest benefits. So that's the full circle here. As I said, we're a nonprofit. Emergent is entirely in this for maximizing environmental benefit. So, how are we different? This is really focused on large-scale transformative impact that's focused jurisdictionally, right? Like at the country level, we're aligned with the Paris Agreement. Credits are verified. Very focused on bringing in like a top-tier team with EDF and Norway and Rockefeller, Good Energies, Packard, all these partners. In fact, just yesterday during London Climate Week, we announced what we call the Green Gigaton Initiative. Basically, we're calling on that we need 1 billion tons, a gigaton of emission reductions from jurisdictional REDD+, so forest protection, transacted per year by 2025. We know we need this to achieve the Paris Agreement, and we think this is doable. And we've partnered with the UN, NEDF, and ART, and Forest Trends to create that platform. Anyway, we're also mission focused, and we're, as I said earlier, focused on achieving highest environmental benefit. And the idea here is really to facilitate scale, right? It's to allow companies to purchase credits very easily. It's designed to mobilize more action in the forest countries so that they can commit to increasing their ambition on their forest protection programs. A few points here is, right, this is all about, I said this earlier, in my view, the protecting and preserving nature is the highest and best use of offset dollars, right? We just need to fundamentally change the economics on the ground where nature is worth more alive than dead. And we need all tools here. We need public, private, philanthropic, etc. Corresponding adjustments is a bit of a technical issue in the Paris Agreement. But I want to say this, right? We want to travel both fast, but also we have to go far. And so we're very partnership oriented. We've got, we're working with a lot of organizations. And I think, those who are listening to this, we'd really be very, and I think there's a call to action, whether you're working at a company and a company should be considering, hey, how do we get involved in this? Can we buy offsets from nature-based, programs? Whether you're sitting in a forest country and, hey, we should be participating. Whether you're thinking just as an individual, maybe I should be offsetting my my travel or some, and how can I get involved? So, so that's emergent. Really, we're focused on this, huge scale reductions in deforestation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that, and of course, like your vision on where you see emergent sort of evolving and scaling. If you were to call our audience to action, whether it is to get involved with some of the work that you're doing, of course, to consider their own sort of decarbonization of their lifestyles or sequestering, etc. But if you could call our audience to action, what would that call to action be?
Yeah, well, so I think it's, certainly, look at your own actions, reduce your emission profile, your emission footprint where you can. Where you can't, think about offsetting by using nature-based offsets. Again, if you're a company, think, and really drive towards real reductions in emissions and within your own operations. Again, for the residual, what you can't, think about a nature-based solutions, nature-based, solution. If you're in civil society, right? If you're in a nonprofit, an NGO, or we're always, we're looking for partners, and we know we can't do this alone. We need collective action here. The time for everybody to go in their corners and fighting about some technical issue is over, right? We need to come together, drive the large scale solutions. We can't make the perfect be the enemy of the good. We don't have enough time for that. We need to move fast, and we need to move very, very large, very large scale.
Fantastic. Well, look, Eron, thank you so much for sharing your notes on Emergent, and absolutely support the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for running with this and really encouraging all of us to keep plowing ahead. Have all of the support that is required through not only thinking through all of these the vision that you've got, but also to know that replenishing Earth and seeing an Earth replenished for us is about taking those steps. And I feel that you are definitely taking those steps, and I feel that you encourage all of us to take even bigger leaps. So thank you so much for your time and joining us on Replenish Earth series for London Climate Action Week and being our final speaker. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure, and thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Eron. Thank you. So that's it for Replenish Earth live series for London Climate Action Week. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to question and delve into the topics that replenish Earth for London Climate Action Week, but also London Climate Action Week doesn't really end here. It goes much further, and it gives us, our audience, our communities, our businesses, and all of those that we have touch points with along the entire supply chain of our lives, the opportunity to adjust and rise to replenish. Today, we've got our final day of the challenge, and you can find out more about that on our Instagram, on all of our socials. You can follow us. You can suggest different projects that you want to work with, Replenish Earth. We've got a dear theme today, which is to be imaginative. And it's really about taking that pledge to go beyond what you know and what you've done before into a realm that is an exploration for all of us. So I wish you all the very best. I'm going to leave you with the pledge video, which is all about the people's pledge to replenish Earth by 2030. Thank you all very much and good night. At London Climate Action Week, we call upon all Londoners to commit to the People's Pledge and be part of our goal to replenish Earth by 2030. My name is Tia Kansara, and I pledge that my time on Earth will not be to destroy the